Deep breath. All right, folks, gather around and brace yourselves for a journey into the dark, twisted world of ancient ritual sacrifice. We're about to dive headfirst into a realm where kings weren't just figureheads or rulers, but living embodiments of divine power, and sometimes sacrificial lambs to the slaughter. Picture this. It's a scorching summer day in ancient Mesopotamia, around 2500 BCE. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the coppery tang of blood. A crowd has gathered in the sacred precinct of Ur, their eyes fixed on a singular figure adorned in regal finery. This isn't just any king. Oh no, this is the sacred king, chosen by the gods themselves to embody the fertility and prosperity of the land. But here's the kicker, folks. His time is up. The harvest has failed, drought plagues the land, and the people are starving. Something's got to give. And in this case, it's the king's life. Nervous chuckle. Talk about job insecurity. Am I right? Now you might be thinking, hold up, why would anyone agree to be king if it meant potentially getting the axe? Well, let me tell you, power is one hell of a drug. These sacred kings weren't just rulers. They were living gods, worshipped and revered. For a time, they enjoyed unimaginable luxury and authority. But with great power comes great, well, you know the rest. The concept of the sacred king sacrifice has fascinated anthropologists and historians for centuries. Sir James Frazer, in his groundbreaking work, The Golden Bough, published in 1890, proposed that this practice was widespread in ancient cultures. He argued that the king was seen as a divine scapegoat, absorbing the sins and misfortunes of the community, only to be sacrificed when things went south. But let's get back to our doomed king in Ur. The priests have determined that his time has come. The people watch, a mixture of awe and horror on their faces, as he's led to the great ziggurat. Whispers. Can you hear the drums? The chanting? The air is electric with anticipation and dread. The king ascends the steps, his gilded robes glinting in the harsh sunlight. With each step, the weight of his impending doom becomes more palpable. At the summit, he turns to face his subjects one last time. In that moment, he's both the most powerful and the most powerless man in the world. The high priest raises the ceremonial dagger, its obsidian blade catching the light. The crowd holds its breath, and then, dramatic pause. Well, I'll leave the gory details to your imagination, folks. Suffice it to say, it wasn't pretty. But here's where it gets really wild. In some cultures, the sacred king wasn't just killed. Oh no, that would be too simple. In ancient Ireland, for instance, there are accounts of a ritual where the soon-to-be king would symbolically mate with a white mare, which was then sacrificed and, Clear's throat consumed. Yeah, you heard that right. Talk about a wedding night gone wrong. Now let's hop over to ancient Scandinavia, where the Norse sagas tell us about the blot, a sacrificial ritual that sometimes involved kings. Imagine this. It's the dead of winter, the land is gripped by famine, and the people are desperate. They turn to their king, not for leadership, but for the ultimate sacrifice. In one particularly chilling account from the 11th century, the Swedish king Domalde was sacrificed after years of famine. The first year, they sacrificed oxen. The second year, men. But when the third year came and the famine persisted, the people decided only the king's blood would suffice. Shudders. Talk about performance reviews gone wrong. But wait, it gets even crazier. In some African kingdoms, the sacred king was expected to commit ritual suicide when his powers began to wane. The Shilluk people of Sudan, for instance, had a tradition where the king would be suffocated or buried alive when he showed signs of illness or impotence. Because nothing says thanks for your service like a pillow to the face, right? Now I know what you're thinking. Surely this is all ancient history, right? We've moved past human sacrifice. Well, hold on to your hats, folks, because there's evidence that these practices continued well into the modern era in some parts of the world. In 1911, a British administrator in Nigeria reported witnessing the ritual killing of a sacred king. The man was bound and forced to ingest poison while his successor waited nearby. As the king's life ebbed away, the power was believed to flow into his replacement. Talk about a hostile takeover. But let's dial it back a bit and consider the psychological impact of all this. Imagine being that sacred king, knowing that your days are numbered, that your very life is tied to the fortunes of your people. Every failed crop, every dry spell, every outbreak of disease. It's all on you, baby. The pressure must have been unimaginable. And what about the people? Living under a system where your ruler could be sacrificed at any moment. Talk about political instability. It's enough to give anyone trust issues. But here's the real mindbender. These sacrifices weren't seen as acts of cruelty or barbarism by the people who practiced them. No, siree. They were acts of cosmic necessity, maintaining the balance between the human and divine realms. The king's death was seen as a renewal, a rebirth of the land and the people. In fact, some scholars argue that the concept of the sacrificial king is at the root of many religious and cultural traditions we still practice today. Ever wonder why we eat the body and drink the blood of Christ in Christian communion? Or why the king of the carnival is symbolically killed at the end of Mardi Gras? Whispers. It's all connected, folks. Now let's take a moment to consider the aftermath of these sacrifices. Picture the scene. The king is dead, his blood soaking into the earth. The people watch, a mixture of relief and trepidation on their faces. What happens next? In many cases, the death of the sacred king was followed by a period of ritualized chaos. Social norms were upended, laws were suspended, and for a brief time anything goes. It was like the purge, ancient style. The idea was that this period of disorder was necessary for the rebirth of order under a new king. But here's the kicker. Sometimes the new king was chosen from among the people who had just participated in killing the old one. Talk about a promotion. One minute you're part of the mob, the next you're wearing the crown. But I bet that first staff meeting was pretty awkward. Now, let's zoom out for a second and consider the bigger picture. Why did so many cultures, separated by vast distances in time, develop similar practices of sacred king sacrifice? Some anthropologists argue that it's a reflection of our deep-seated need to control the uncontrollable. Think about it. In ancient times, life was incredibly precarious. A bad harvest, a drought, a plague, any of these could wipe out entire communities. The idea that you could influence these forces by sacrificing your leader? Well, that must have been pretty appealing. But it's not just about control. These rituals also served as a powerful reminder of the king's responsibility to his people. After all, if your life is literally on the line, you're probably going to think twice before making decisions that could harm your subjects. It's like the ultimate performance review, with slightly higher stakes. Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on male rulers, but let's not forget that in some cultures, it was queens or priestesses who faced the sacrificial knife. In ancient Sumer, for instance, there's evidence of royal women being buried alive as part of religious ceremonies. Shudders talk about "till death do us part." But here's a twist for you. In some cases, the sacred ruler found ways to cheat death. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered a living god, but they weren't too keen on the whole dying for the people thing. Instead, they came up with the clever idea of creating a substitute, a statue or effigy that could be killed in the pharaoh's place. Now that's what I call thinking outside the box. Speaking of clever workarounds, let's talk about the Khan people of India. They had a tradition of sacrificing human victims called Mariah, who were often bought as children and raised for the purpose. But here's the twist. The British colonizers, horrified by the practice, tried to stamp it out. So what did the Khan do? They started using buffalo instead. Chuckles. I guess you could say they had a beef with human sacrifice. But let's get back to our sacred kings for a moment. Imagine being in their shoes, or sandals, as the case may be. You're living the high life, worshipped as a god, with unimaginable power at your fingertips. But all the while, you know that your reign could end at any moment, not just through natural causes or assassination, but through ritual sacrifice demanded by your own people. The psychological toll must have been enormous. Some kings probably lived in constant fear, while others might have embraced their fate with a kind of fatalistic bravado. Can you imagine the paranoia? Every cough, every gray hair, every minor setback in the kingdom could be seen as a sign that your time was up. And what about the families of these sacred kings? Imagine being the queen, knowing that your husband could be sacrificed at any moment. Or being a prince, watching your father ascend to the throne, knowing that one day you might have to participate in his ritual killing. Talk about family drama. Now let's take a moment to consider the role of the priests in all this. These weren't just religious figures. They were kingmakers and kingbreakers. They had the power to interpret omens, to decide when a king's time was up, to oversee the sacrificial rituals. In many ways, they held more power than the kings themselves. But here's the real mind-bender. In some cultures, the role of sacred king was actually seen as desirable. Can you believe it? People would compete for the chance to be chosen, knowing full well that it could lead to their eventual sacrifice. It's like the ultimate game of high-stakes poker. You might end up on top of the world, or you might end up on the sacrificial altar. Now, I know we've been painting a pretty grim picture here, but let's not forget that these practices were deeply meaningful to the people who participated in them. They weren't just acts of random violence. They were complex rituals, steeped in symbolism and spiritual significance. Take the Aztec practice of human sacrifice, for instance. While not strictly a case of sacred king sacrifice, it operates on similar principles. The victims were often treated as incarnations of gods before being sacrificed. It was believed that their deaths sustained the universe itself. Heavy stuff, right? But here's where it gets really wild. Some scholars argue that these practices of sacred king sacrifice actually played a crucial role in the development of civilization as we know it. The idea is that by ritualizing and controlling violence, these societies were able to channel it in ways that ultimately led to more stable forms of government. Think about it. If the king can be sacrificed for the good of the people, then the idea that no one is above the law isn't such a stretch. Some historians argue that this concept is at the root of modern ideas about democracy and the social contract. Mind-blown sound effect. Now let's take a moment to consider the legacy of these practices. While we may have moved past literal human sacrifice, thankfully, the idea of leadership as a form of sacrifice is still very much with us. Every time we talk about a leader falling on their sword or taking one for the team, we're echoing these ancient concepts. And let's not forget the way we sometimes treat our modern celebrities and leaders. We build them up, worship them almost as gods, and then take an almost perverse pleasure in watching them fall. It's like we're playing out these ancient dramas on a global stage, with the media as our high priests and Twitter as our sacrificial altar. But here's a thought to really keep you up at night. What if these practices never really went away? What if they just evolved? I mean, think about it. We may not literally sacrifice our leaders anymore, but we sure do love to metaphorically crucify them in the court of public opinion. And in some parts of the world, coups and assassinations are still very much a part of political life. Nervous laughter. But hey, at least we're not feeding anyone to the gods, right? As we wrap up this journey into the dark heart of ancient ritual sacrifice, I want you to take a moment to really let it all sink in. The power, the terror, the cosmic drama of it all. These weren't just brutal acts of violence. They were attempts to make sense of a chaotic world, to assert some kind of control over forces that seemed beyond human comprehension. And in a way, aren't we still doing the same thing? We may have traded in our sacrificial daggers for smartphones and our blood rituals for elections, but at our core, we're still trying to navigate the same fundamental questions of power, responsibility, and the relationship between leaders and the leto. So the next time you hear about a political scandal or watch a celebrity fall from grace, remember, you're not just witnessing current events. You're participating in a drama as old as civilization itself. A drama of power, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle to balance the needs of the many against the fate of the few. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, in some hidden corner of the world, a sacred king still sits on his throne, watching the horizon and wondering if this harvest will be his last. Ominous music fades in sweet dreams, folks. And remember, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.